You think you control your life? Think again. Imagine a force so vast, so quietly powerful, that its reach eclipses everything you've been taught to worship. Apple, Microsoft, Amazon, Saudi Aramco, combine them, and you still wouldn't reach the value of this empire. This isn't a fantasy. It's the story of a Dutch company born over 400 years ago. A company that rewrote the rules of power, finance, and empire itself. When most of us think of old money, we picture the Rothschilds, the Rockefellers, maybe a Rockefeller mansion or a Rothschild ledger. But the true architects of modern capitalism were far less visible, far less talked about, and far more dangerous in their ability to shape the world. The Dutch East India Company, or the VOC, and the House of Orange behind it. Let's take a step back to 1580, when the political landscape of Europe shifted in a way that would forever alter the mechanics of power. Spain had absorbed Portugal in a personal union, suddenly commanding territories across Africa, Asia, and the Americas. This wasn't a small merger. This was the equivalent of two global superpowers joining forces, and for the Dutch, it was an existential threat. Locked in their own struggle for independence, the Dutch suddenly faced an empire that seemed unstoppable, and they knew that brute force alone would not secure survival. But the Dutch were smart, and necessity forced them to innovate in ways that the world had never seen. They discovered a new weapon, one that could scale faster than armies, faster than cannons: capital. Not capital in the sense of gold stored in a castle, but capital that could be invested, multiplied, and leveraged by ordinary citizens. In 1602, 7 private trading companies merged to form what we now know as the VOC. On the surface, it seemed like just another merchant company, but underneath it was a machine of economic warfare. It commanded ships armed like warships, maintained private armies, built forts, and negotiated treaties as if it were a sovereign state. For the first time in history, ordinary citizens could fund imperial expansion and profit from it, turning their savings into direct instruments of conquest. Imagine holding a stake in the very mechanism that reshaped Asia, controlled trade, and challenged empires, all from your home in Amsterdam. And while the merchants drew the blueprints, plotting trade routes and contracts, the House of Orange watched quietly. This family, one of the most prominent in the Netherlands, held titles that were weak, authority that was fragile, and yet in a republic run by merchants, they realized that traditional power, land, gold, or hereditary rights, was no longer enough. They were squeezed from all sides. Amsterdam's elite wanted a tighter merchant-controlled republic. Spain wanted their dynasty extinguished, and the house had no land to back up their claims. Faced with fading relevance, they did the only thing they could. They invested in capital. They didn't run the VOC, but they financed it, tied their future to it, and in doing so, secured a leverage that would allow them to shape the republic's future. Their descendants would rise to positions of unimaginable influence, holding dual presidencies of the VOC and the West India Company, becoming some of the most powerful men in Europe. Their authority backed not by thrones, but by dividends. This was more than a financial innovation. It was a new kind of sovereignty. Imagine a company whose market value dwarfs the GDP of entire nations, whose private armies enforce trade, whose employees number in the tens of thousands, all operating under a charter that allowed them to govern colonies, make treaties, and act as a state. The VOC was not just a business. It was an empire in motion, with a stock market that allowed citizens to buy in, spread risk, and even speculate on the future. Limited liability protected them, giving ordinary investors confidence they had never known. And behind it all, fear. Fear of missing out, fear of being left behind, fear that if you didn't hold a piece of this company, you'd be powerless in a world being reshaped by trade, finance, and capital. As the VOC's reach expanded, so too did the Dutch Republic's financial influence. Merchants, investors, and elites became intertwined in a system that blurred the line between private wealth and public power. Ordinary citizens found themselves participating in empire building, their personal stakes fueling conquest, colonization, and commerce across Asia. Batavia, modern-day Jakarta, became a hub, not just for trade, but for a global experiment in governance, finance, and market-driven authority. And while we marvel at the power of Apple or Amazon today, remember this: the VOC did this 400 years ago, long before the Industrial Revolution, long before global corporations became the norm. Their innovations, publicly traded shares, limited liability, transferable ownership, speculation, laid the foundation for everything we now take for granted in capitalism. And through it all, the House of Orange waited patiently, quietly consolidating influence, showing the world that crowns are not necessary to wield power. Capital is. They proved that money, networks, and markets could be more potent than armies and kings, and they set the stage for centuries of Dutch influence that would ripple across continents and centuries. But as you sit there thinking about how safe and in control your life is, consider this: the system you participate in today, the stock markets, the corporate empires, even the flow of global capital is still built on the principles these quiet Dutch merchants and their royal backers engineered. They weren't just making money. They were making history, shaping power, and redefining what it means to rule. And most people don't even know they exist. Imagine living in a world where ordinary citizens could directly fund an empire. A world where your savings could influence global trade, dictate the rise and fall of nations, and even decide who held real power. That was the reality in the Dutch Republic in the early 1600s. The VOC, the Dutch East India Company, wasn't just a company. It was the blueprint for everything we now call modern capitalism. By merging 7 smaller trading companies, the VOC created the first publicly traded company in human history, and with it, the first IPO. Think about it. People like you and me could buy a piece of a global empire, transfer ownership, sell it, profit from it, and all without ever needing a royal blessing or a noble title. This wasn't just finance, it was power distributed in ways the world had never seen. And yet, the stakes were terrifying. Ships sank, trade routes collapsed, wars erupted. And the people who invested, ordinary Dutch citizens, stood to lose everything if they weren't careful. But here's where genius and fear met. The VOC pioneered limited liability. If a ship went down, investors lost only what they put in. Their homes, their lands, their families remained safe. Suddenly, risk became predictable, controlled, and, in a twisted way, exciting. Imagine the first cases of financial FOMO, people scrambling to buy shares in the VOC, because they didn't want to be left behind while others profited from the world, its most ambitious empire. And what fueled this empire wasn't just money, it was scale. By the 1620s, VOC ships were sailing across Asia with tens of thousands of employees, sailors, clerks, soldiers, craftsmen, and administrators, all part of a single corporate machine with one goal: profit and power. These fleets weren't just transporting spices, they were moving influence. And the VOC wasn't just conquering markets, it was building a new kind of state, one that acted like a sovereign but was legally a company. They signed treaties, raised armies, captured territories, and ruled colonies, all while paying dividends to shareholders back home in Amsterdam. Batavia, today Jakarta, became the crown jewel of this empire. By 1619, it was transformed from a cluster of ports into a center of gravity for Dutch operations in Asia. Its streets, its forts, and its trading posts were carefully engineered to optimize commerce, control, and enforcement. Indigenous populations were displaced, coerced, and often massacred, but to the Dutch, this was just the cost of building an empire. The VOC was ruthless, and it thrived on fear. Fear of losing control, fear of rivals, fear of missing out. And this fear was systematized into governance and finance. At home, Amsterdam was a city buzzing with traders, bankers, and investors. The stock market there, the world's first secondary market, allowed shares of the VOC to flow from hand to hand, city to city. Suddenly, wealth was no longer tied to land, to castles, or to the divine right of kings. It was liquid, it was mobile, and it could be deployed anywhere, anytime to crush rivals or build empires. This was power you could hold in your hand, or in a ledger, without ever firing a gun. But the House of Orange, always lurking in the background, wasn't content to merely watch. Their influence was subtle but decisive. By investing in the VOC, they secured leverage, giving them authority in a republic where traditional nobility had little meaning. They tied their ambitions to capital, and in doing so, they became stakeholders in history itself. Their descendants, William IV and William V, didn't inherit thrones, but they inherited influence backed by dividends, shares, and positions of authority. The VOC had created a hybrid state, blending commerce and sovereignty. But it wasn't just about the Dutch. Its innovations would ripple across Europe and eventually shape the modern world. William of Orange, for example, would take these ideas to England during the Glorious Revolution, where the fusion of markets and governance became a model for modern public finance, central banking, and government debt. The Dutch had proven that markets could be more powerful than crowns, and yet, none of this came without human cost. Behind the numbers were millions of lives forced into labor, displaced, or destroyed. The Banda Islands massacre, the Amboina executions, the Batavia massacres, all reminders that empire, even when codified through finance, left trails of suffering in its wake. And still, the VOC thrived. Its ships sailed between the Persian Gulf, India, the Indonesian archipelago, and Japan. Private armies enforced trade agreements. Forts secured strategic choke points. And at the center of it all was money flowing from Amsterdam, a city whose banking and financial infrastructure made global empire possible. Speculation wasn't just allowed, it was encouraged. Merchants traded shares, hedged investments, and built a financial system that anticipated risk while profiting from it. They created the tools Wall Street uses today: derivatives, speculation, risk distribution, and secondary markets. This wasn't just business. It was the birth of the modern financial mind. And yet, for all its genius, the VOC's scale was both its strength and its weakness. Decision-making grew slow as bureaucracies expanded, corruption crept in, and military overreach became costly. By the late 1700s, what had been the most powerful entity in the world began to crumble, slowly swallowed by its own ambition and by changing markets. But even as the company faded, its innovations endured. Public investment, limited liability, transferable shares, secondary markets, these ideas survived, traveling across Europe, influencing London, then America, and eventually forming the backbone of global finance. The lessons were clear. Empire wasn't just about guns. It was about money, networks, and the ability to make capital move faster than armies. And as you sit here watching the world today, consider this. The system you navigate, the stock market, corporate empires, multinational conglomerates, was built on the blueprint of the VOC. Its shadow stretches from Amsterdam to London, to New York, to the heart of Wall Street. The Dutch didn't just trade spices. They traded influence, they traded power, and they traded the very mechanisms that let ordinary citizens participate in empire building. And through it all, the House of Orange quietly waited, invested, and expanded their reach, showing that crowns might be ceremonial, but capital is absolute. They understood what few understood then, and even fewer see now. To control wealth is to control the world, and to control the world quietly is to ensure your name may never make headlines, but your influence will be everywhere. Today, when we speak of capitalism, we think of the Rothschilds, the Rockefellers, the Morgans, but they are merely heirs to a system already invented. The real architects, the true designers of financial sovereignty, remain hidden behind centuries of history, their legacy embedded in every stock certificate, every bank ledger, and every IPO ever issued. And as you reflect on this, a question lingers as terrifying as it is exhilarating. If all of this was possible 400 years ago, and if markets now hold the same power that once belonged to kings, then who really controls the world today? Who holds the crown when the crown is invisible, and the empire is now built on digits, contracts, and investment flows? Perhaps the answer is out of reach, but the lesson remains. Power is never gone. It just changes shape, moving silently, invisibly, and often completely undetected. By the late 1700s, the Dutch East India Company, once the unstoppable titan of trade, began to show cracks in its armor. The same empire that had reshaped the world through finance and force was now weighed down by its own ambition. Corruption seeped into boardrooms, decision-making slowed to a crawl, and rival powers like Britain and France grew more aggressive, nimble, and daring. Imagine being an ordinary investor back then. Your wealth, your family's future, tied to ships sailing thousands of miles away, with storms, pirates, and rival armies waiting to turn profit into disaster. It was a system of immense opportunity, but also immense terror. And yet, even as the VOC faltered, the legacy it left was permanent, invisible, and far more powerful than any crown. The idea that wealth could move independently of kings, that capital could become sovereign in its own right, continued to shape Europe, Asia, and eventually the Americas. The VOC's demise wasn't sudden. It was a slow surrender to inefficiency, mismanagement, and global shifts. But its ideas never died. Public investment, transferable shares, secondary markets, risk management, speculation, and the very notion of limited liability survived. They evolved into the financial tools we now take for granted, quietly underpinning global capitalism. But while the company itself faded, the House of Orange didn't disappear. They had learned the most important lesson the VOC could teach. Influence can be sustained without land, without armies, without crowns. By aligning themselves with commerce, finance, and global networks, they became stakeholders in history itself. Their wealth, their legacy was now embedded in trade, in investments, and in the mechanisms that made empires rise and fall. And as the Dutch Empire's fleets shrank, its intellectual and financial influence only grew. The Dutch weren't just retreating, they were exporting their innovations. Across the English Channel, William of Orange used these ideas to orchestrate the Glorious Revolution, merging financial ingenuity with governance. England, under William and Mary II, launched the Bank of England, introduced public credit, and created government bonds to fund wars. Dutch methods now codified into British law. And across the Atlantic, Dutch influence shaped New Amsterdam, which the British would later rename New York. Streets were laid with trade in mind, legal structures reflected Dutch commerce principles, and financial habits, credit, contracts, and institutions created a foundation that transformed a port town into the epicenter of global finance centuries later. From Amsterdam to London to New York, the architecture of money, risk, and trade traveled silently but relentlessly, and the House of Orange quietly ensured that they remained at the center. While the VOC fleets no longer ruled the seas, Dutch capital continued to move with power. The crown may have become ceremonial, but the family's financial influence remained active in boardrooms, in corporations, and in investments that shaped the modern world. In the 20th century, the story took a new turn. The Royal Dutch merged with Shell Transport and Trading Company in 1907, creating Royal Dutch Shell, an energy titan whose influence would span continents. Once again, Dutch capital was married to global ambition, tied to a royal name, and capable of shaping markets, politics, and infrastructure. It wasn't just a company, it was a continuation of the VOC's principles, scaled to the industrial age. Today, Dutch influence is everywhere. The Netherlands is a financial hub, attracting trillions in foreign investment, holding stakes in multinational companies, and quietly shaping corporate policy through trusts, foundations, and strategic shareholding. And behind all of this, the House of Orange remains present, a reminder that power doesn't need visibility to be absolute. From the VOC to Shell, from New Amsterdam to New York, the fingerprints of Dutch financial innovation are etched into global history. But it's not all prosperity and influence. The VOC's expansion brought massacres, forced labor, and suffering that can never be erased. Banda Islands, Amboina, Batavia, thousands died or were displaced to fuel spice empires. The company's success was built on human misery, a reminder that empires, financial or otherwise, carry a cost invisible in ledgers but visible in the scars of history. And so, as we consider the modern world, there is a chilling question that remains. If markets now wield the same power that once belonged to monarchs, then who really governs these markets? Who holds the crown when the crown is invisible? When influence is embedded in shares, contracts, and boards that move silently across borders? The answer is both comforting and terrifying. The crown is everywhere and nowhere. Power has moved from swords to spreadsheets, from thrones to trading floors. And the lesson of the Dutch Empire is clear. Empires can live on long after their fleets have vanished, as long as their ideas continue to shape the way money, influence, and risk flow through the world. So next time you glance at a stock certificate, scroll through market news, or consider your own investments, remember the VOC, the House of Orange, and the invisible empires they created. Because the system you participate in today, the global economy, multinational corporations, public finance, is built on a foundation 400 years old, forged in the ports of Amsterdam and the islands of Indonesia, carried across oceans, and quietly extended by a family whose influence still reaches into boardrooms and financial networks worldwide. It's history you don't see, power you don't feel, and legacy you can't ignore. And if you've followed this journey, if you've glimpsed the magnitude of influence hidden in the currents of money, then you've reached the part of history few ever see. The endings of empires are rarely abrupt. They are threads woven into the systems that succeed them. And the VOC, despite its fall, never truly ended. Its DNA remains in modern capitalism, public investment, corporate law, and the invisible hand of influence that moves the world today. And that, my friends, is the story you weren't supposed to reach, but now you have. A story of unseen power, of empires built on ideas more than armies, of wealth that outlasts kings and influence that quietly governs the world from shadows. So if you want to continue exploring the hidden histories of finance, power, and empires, don't forget to subscribe to Pastify Hub. You've seen the blueprint of capitalism, the ghosts of empires past, and the invisible crown that still rules today. And trust me, this is just the beginning.